With the new year fast approaching, it's time to reflect. On today's edition of Locked On Oilers, we'll compare where the Oilers were on this day last year versus where they are now.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Thursday edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel, where you can enjoy the NFL season with a big return. New customers can place a $5 bet and get started with $250 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So, on today's edition of Locked On Oilers, we're going to walk through the various components of a team evaluation. Look, record, underlying numbers, narratives, all that good stuff, and compare it last year versus this year. So, I like doing things like this because it's very helpful for context. You know, everybody likes to, this time of year, reflect, account, and look forward. You know, it's normal that with the new year approaching, you start thinking about what you were able to accomplish this year, what you weren't, how you might be able to take steps to remedy that, the progress you might be able to make or not make. And in sports, it's a lot easier than it is for some of us in our actual day-to-day lives. You know, it's a lot easier for a team to reflect on meeting or failing to meet its goals than us in our day-to-day lives. You know, I don't get a performance evaluation for how good a friend I was, how good a family member I was, how good an employee I was. You know, you get some feedback, but nothing ever in depth in life as you will a wins and loss record. I think, frankly, it's one of the things I like the most about sports and why I've naturally gravitated towards them in my life, the work I do, is because at the end of the day, there is a score. You have a defined winner, you have a defined loser, and you watch the game. So you know how both parties got to where they were going. And frankly, I feel like life needs a scoreboard at times, and the scoreboards out there in the real world are not reflective of true value. They're reflective of cultural or maybe societal value, which isn't necessarily the most straightforward or always accurate way to measure things. You know, you would say, well, the scoreboard of life is happiness, it's wealth, whatever. That's not the same as the standings. You know, there is no going to people.com and looking at the rankings of most successful. It's not like the NHL standings. There are no loser points in your day-to-day life. But I wanted to do this today because the Oilers are in a pretty good spot right now. You know, there's work to be done. There always is. In a long season, you are always going to have more you can accomplish and progress you can make. You know, it's why we've been hammering on Locked On Oilers the idea of making incremental progress as the season develops. So you don't need to make any one game too valuable, but you can start to make progress. You can play a little bit better. You can start to get certain players into bigger, more prominent roles. And one of the things you can look at is very straightforward. Number one, you can look at the records. On this day last year, on December 26th, the Oilers had played a few more games. The Oilers this year have played a few more games than they did last year. You have to remember they started abroad last year. They had those games overseas that kind of put a dampening on their schedule because they got some extra days off because of travel. On this day last year, the Oilers were 15-15-1. This year, 21-11-2. Significantly better from a points percentage perspective, something that you should frankly feel pretty good about. And obviously, you know, last year's start was one of the was really not something you're going to feel great about. Like I'm looking at the standings from this day last year, and this day last year, the Oilers were 7th in the Western Conference in the wild card standings. They were 7 points out of the second to last 5 points back of the second to last wild card, and they had a 500 points percentage. Today, as we sit here, they are sitting at a 647 points percentage. You know, if the Oilers sit between 640 and 700 as a points percentage rest of the way, they're going to have a really strong record. They'll most likely have home ice in the first round, if not be able to usurp or pass Vegas. And look, I know Vegas has had a really good start to this season, and they are looking every bit the bona fide contender. Noah Hannafin has settled in very well there for them, but I'm not particularly worried about anyone else's journey. You know, if you're ever working out, you're ever running, even if you're working out with a friend, you never want to do the direct one-to-one because everyone's working at different paces. Everyone's training is at different paces. Sure, you know, if your friend lifts more weight than you or can run further than you want to work to that point. You know, you want to add weight to your lifts, you want to add distance to your runs or pace to your runs because you want to improve. But if you're the Oilers, you can't get caught up in what Vegas is doing. You have to run your race. And part of that is maintaining. You know, last year they come out of the gate miserably. They start the season 2-9-1. This year, 6-5-1. And look, I can put my hand up sitting here on December 26th and say, I was definitely maybe, shout out Oasis. I was a little more concerned about the Oilers this year after that first 10 games or so than I probably needed to be. And I felt that the benchmark statistics, you know, the shooting percentage, the special teams, I knew those weren't going to be as bad as they were all year. And frankly, it was more so the anecdotal of watching every game and that the same mistakes kept getting made by the same players over and over again. And it felt like there wasn't any progress. Of course, things have started to stabilize, and over the course of the last month, some of the issues from that first month have been great. You know, the Darnell Nurse and Brett Kulak minutes have been outstanding. Stetcher has played reasonably well, and he's played with Nurse. Emerson has played reasonably well with Kulak, and the goaltending has been significantly better this year than it was at this point last year. We'll talk about that and a lot of the other key statistics in the next segment, but the components of a successful team were in place in both iterations. You know, you think about where they were last year. They went into the year Jack Campbell coming off of getting benched, but a full offseason, mental reset. You have Evander Kane healthy. You have Warren Fogle. You have Ryan McLeod. You have the bones of a pretty good team. And then simply you get off to the wonky start. You know, Ekholm gets hurt, doesn't really get a full preseason, really takes a little while to ramp up. You're dealing with McDavid coming off of a summer where he admits to himself he trained a little bit too hard. He wasn't as fresh as he would have liked to have been at the start of the season because he had worked so hard. And they get out to the nightmare start. You know, you start 2-9-1, you get Jay Woodcroft fired, but you start to turn it around almost immediately. You know, they rattle off an 8-game winning streak last year, midway through November into December. This year, the longest winning streak they have so far is 5 games. They do have an active 3-game winning streak as of the moment, as we're sitting here right now. Of course, they're not back in action for a few more days, but when you're talking about just the record, the standings, everything, they're in a significantly better position right now than they were last year. And we can understand how you get off to the kinds of bad starts they do. You know, the goaltending last year when Jack Campbell was still trying to work it out and the Oilers were trying to salvage their free agent signing, they really wanted that to work, and Jack Campbell just wasn't ready for it. He wasn't good enough. And Stuart Skinner, as he worked himself in, got better as the season went along. The underlying numbers this year are a little bit different than last year. We're going to talk about those coming up next on today's edition of Locked On Oilers, so be sure to stick around. In my time as the host of Locked On Oilers, I've talked about a lot of different things, but if you're familiar with me, if you know me, you follow me on social media, you know I love going to events, concerts, games, comedy. Tonight, I'm going to WWE at MSG, going to see one of my favorite wrestlers of all time, CM Punk, wrestle. I got my tickets to go to the show from Gametime, the only place I buy tickets, the best app with some of the best features in the ticket buying experience, things like all-in pricing, where you toggle the feature on up front and there are no surprise fees at checkout. The seat view, where you get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. Lowest price guarantee or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. And Gametime ticket coverage, where your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Thursday edition of Locked On Oilers as we're making our way through a busy holiday week. I hope everybody had a safe and fun Christmas, first night of Hanukkah, if that's what you celebrate. It's it's a good time of year. I know for some it's a difficult time of year. There are empty chairs. There are people that aren't around that used to be, and it's a lot to reflect on and it's a lot to think on. And just know that everything is still in front of you. You know, you've got a lot of time, you've got a lot of people who care, and it's just a matter of putting it all together. The recipe for to be successful, to be happy, it's doable. It takes work. It's like a lot of things. If you are willing to put the work in, you can make more out of things. And in the context of hockey, in the context of the Oilers of this show, I really do try and put the thinking person's hat on. You know, there's a clip I think about all the time of Peter Drury, who does soccer commentary in England, and the way he describes it is, even if you're watching two very bad teams, you know, if you're watching the 11th versus the 12th place team in the Premier League, to a lot of people that game doesn't matter, but to the fans of those two teams, that matters to them. You know, that the result of that game, that match, will define their weekend. And if you are 0-0 after 85 minutes, it might not be a good game, but you are absolutely on pins and needles if you care about that game 0-0 after 85 minutes. And that's the lens I try and approach this show through, that even if you miss a game, you hit the keynotes, but don't beat you over the head with the entire game recap. If you were talking about something philosophical, I like to talk about it in terms of layers or tiers, where we build out ideas to make them more detailed, thorough, and complex, starting with the most basic. So with that in mind, the Oilers last year, they get off to the brutal start. They do the coaching change. They get the kick in the butt from the new coaching change. But in my opinion, the biggest difference, and the reason the Oilers aren't as in dire straits this year as they were last year, simply put, is the goaltending. You know, I'm looking at it right now from Natural Stat Trick. Last year on this day, the Oilers team save percentage was .898 at 5-on-5. This year, it's .912. To me, that's the biggest difference, because when you go beat by beat through the other statistics, they're generating fewer high danger chances than last year. They're conceding slightly less high danger chances, so that balances out to some degree. In terms of expected goals, they're generating almost more than half a goal less than they did last season. They're conceding slightly less, so that tells you they're playing slightly better defense. They're scoring about 0.1 fewer goals per 60 minutes at 5-on-5. The goals against have been significantly better, half a goal against less. In terms of scoring chances, they generated more scoring chances per 60 last year, and they conceded fewer scoring chances per 60. But when you look through those numbers and you start to look at them all engrossing, you know, you start with this and build out and build out and build out. Number one, it's not a surprise to say that the Oilers are playing better defense this year, and that in part is going to make your goalie's life a little bit easier, because you think about the Oilers when they're at their best, especially this season, it has been the games where the defense is crisp, the transition play is immaculate, and they can really build out their program. You know, I talk all the time here on Locked On Oilers, and the everydayers know this. The Oilers are a predatory and taking advantage type team. If you make mistakes, they will stomp on your throat and destroy you. And when they're able to get out to a 1-goal lead, that's where they can kind of start to work the game in their favor, because you feel that sense of desperation as the Oilers. If the other team's down 1-0, and 1-0 is not an insurmountable lead, you know, in hockey, 1-0 is doable, 2-0 is doable, even 3-0 is not entirely out of the realm of the question if you're a good team. But when you're trailing by 1, everybody starts gripping their sticks a little bit tighter. Everyone starts being a hair more aggressive, and that starts to weigh on you. Everybody starts to think about, well, if we're down 1, we got to start creating more chances. So what does that mean? That means we're going to leak down further in the offensive zone. That extra forward who maybe should be between the circles is a little bit closer to the net. That means a lot of the time, if the puck gets in deep, whether that's a shot on goal or the puck just goes below the goal line, that means the defensive team is going to have a numbers advantage going back the other way. Because think about it. If you're in the offensive zone and the puck is down low, and when that puck is below the goal line and the offensive team is cheating lower and lower, that gives the defensive team the opportunity, if they can execute that first exit pass, a clean breakout. If one team has two players back defensively in the defensive zone, typically that third forward is going to that third player, I should say, not forward, is going to come back and try and help defensively. But when you get overcommitted because you're chasing, because you're trying to find that leveling goal, you're going to surrender numbers advantages somewhere on the ice. If you're bringing that extra forward down, that's going to open up the chance for the other team to go the other way. And that's typically where the Oilers are at their best, is when they catch you really aggressively forechecking. If they can get that first exit pass clean, or they can get the organized regroup to McDavid. Of course, the McDavid zone exit is not something that most teams have in their toolbox. The Oilers' ability to break that puck out cleanly and build up speed and get everybody else going, it's really a cheat code when you think about it. If you're moving that puck to anybody on your team, you feel, okay, we're going to at least get out of the zone. But McDavid is a one-man offense. That instant zone creation, that zone entry creation, it's something that there aren't a lot of guys who are great at. Jack Hughes is very good at it. Matt Barzal, Kirill Kaprizov. There are players who are good at that skill. Nathan McKinnon as well. But McDavid is a singular force in that respect because it's instant offense. And there's always the running joke, what do you want the quarterback to do? Throw it and catch it after he throws it? And in McDavid's case, that's kind of what it is. Typically that forward is going to make one pass or two through the neutral zone to gain the offensive zone. But instead, McDavid just kind of skates in a straight line and goes past everybody. And when you have that in your toolbox and 22, 23 minutes a night of that, it opens up a lot of opportunities for you offensively, and it minimizes what you're asking your defense to do. And that's when the Oilers are at their best. When their defense only has to make the simple plays, get the puck to your playmakers, move the puck along. All you got to do, play less defense than the other team. And most nights, if the Oilers can do that, they can win. We go back to our playoff motto from last year. If Stuart Skinner only has to be a guy, you're in great shape. If Stuart Skinner needs to be the guy, you're going to have some trouble. We can extend that same principle to the defense. If Darnell Nurse is playing high leverage minutes against the other team's best players, you're probably going to have a harder time than you would if he's playing a little bit less. You want Nurse using his skating, using his puck skills to get the puck out of his own end, get to the offensive zone, and on occasion, let him attack the net because he has okay offensive instincts. It's a lot of the concern and the hand-wringing about Darnell Nurse over the last 2 years has been his decision-making. If he's a little more conservative or he's a bit more choosy when he decides to be aggressive, it would unlock more of his game. And without question, the mistakes have died down significantly over the last month and a half or so. I would say without hesitation that Nurse has been really good, frankly, since mid-November. And it's one of the driving forces of the team's success. Sure, you could say, well, it came when he started playing more with Brett Kulak. He's not being asked to do as much. He's getting easier workload. Sure, all of those are fair addendums onto the, he's playing well statement, but you got to give credit where it's due. If you have guys making noticeable improvements during the course of a single season, let alone over the course year over year, that's something to feel good about, not something to necessarily worry about. Of course, you want to keep it in the back of your mind what he's doing to be successful right now so that if another rut comes up, you have the opportunity to say, well, what were you doing then that was working for you versus now where you're struggling again? That's something to keep in mind as well. We're going to take one more break on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. We get back, we'll tie a bow on this episode, talk some bigger picture, some narratives, thematic ideas, and then send you guys on your way into Friday. Be right back. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. FanDuel has so many ways for you to pick up a W. I love betting on which players will score touchdowns, how many points each team will score, and so much more. Tonight in the NFL, you got the Seahawks and the Bears. The Seahawks heading to Chicago, where the Seahawks are 4.5-point favorites. Saturday triple header, Chargers at the Patriots. Justin Herbert's 4.5-point road favorite. The Broncos facing the Bengals needing a win to stay alive in their valiant effort to make the AFC playoffs. The Bengals 3.5-point home favorites, And then the nightcap, NFC West, Arizona Cardinals at the Rams, where the Rams are 6.5-point favorites. Visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Thursday edition of Locked On Oilers as we are comparing the team from this year versus last year on this day. And one of the real telltale marks, and I don't think this is as much an endorsement of the Oilers as it is an indictment of the rest of the league, the Stanley Cup odds. And let me preface this next thought with this. Betting markets are not an entire or total encapsulation or reflection of the market's opinion of said value. You know, if a team is priced at a certain number, the idea, the way that line is set, is to get action on all of the potential outcomes. You know, if we are pricing all 32 teams as Stanley Cup contenders, we want to set the price for all of those teams at a price where we feel like we can get bets on all of those numbers. That's how that price is set. You know, if you look at the date, the Oilers on this day last year, they were 15-1 to win the Stanley Cup. Of course, you have the context of the really bad start and the new coach, and that historically only a handful of times has the coaching change in season resulted in an eventual Stanley Cup. You have the goaltending concerns, which was something that was really prescient last year, which still in like the upper echelon of concerns for this Oilers team as far as winning a Stanley Cup is Stuart Skinner in the big moment. But this year, as of December 26th, where we're sitting here, the Oilers are priced at 7.5 to 1. They're one of the best teams in terms of price because the results are there. People have proof of concept now in that they saw the Oilers make a great playoff run last year with this defensive group, if not a worse defensive group, and this goaltending duo, you know, is sitting here. The Hurricanes are priced as the betting favorite at 7.5 to 1, same as the Oilers. Then the Stars, the Panthers, they're both 10 to 1. The Devils are 11 to 1. The Avalanche are 12 to 1. Vegas is 16. Toronto is 13. You know, when you think about it, I think the Oilers being priced where they're at 7.5 to 1, I think that's more an indictment of the rest of the NHL than anything, because I would say the Oilers last year had the benefit of not having the extra mileage. And look, I'm never going to say it's a bad thing to go deep in the playoffs, even if you don't win the Stanley Cup, because that experience is invaluable. It forges character, it builds confidence, and frankly can define people for what they are as hockey players. But when you go on that long playoff run where your season doesn't end until the last week of June, you're then in a position as a hockey team where you have mileage. You know, the Oilers had a short summer. They only had most of July, a little bit of August, and then like a week and a half in September. And you compare that to some of the teams that were out earlier, whether you want to talk about Colorado, Vancouver, or first round exit teams like Vegas. Those miles, those playoff games, they age you in dog years. You think about how many games, extra games, the Oilers and the Panthers played last year in comparison to some of these other teams. And I do think that will eventually matter. But the prices for the Oilers and the Canes being what they are, I think that tells you, number one, the public doesn't have a lot of confidence in any other teams, because if there were another team, you know, like Vegas or Toronto or Florida, that the public was really betting a lot on, those numbers would move more in the direction of where the Oilers and Carolina are at. You know, if I were to have this conversation from a market perspective, I would probably be in that middle tier of teams. You know, I would be looking at Vegas at 16 to 1 or the Devils at 11 to 1 as better value than the Oilers or the Hurricanes. That said, the Oilers are probably the best team in the West. Now, the West is significantly more difficult than the East. That is something that benefits Carolina massively. You know, if you were to do this in terms of who do you trust the most, I would say I trust Florida the most because they just proved they could do this. I would say I trust Vegas because Vegas has shown the ability to do this. And then of the teams that haven't done it, I would say Edmonton over Dallas and Carolina because they've at least made a cup final. Carolina hasn't under Rod Brind'Amour, and Dallas hasn't with this configuration of guys. Yeah, they made the cup final in 20 and in the bubble, but that was a different team built around a different group. So I would put a lot of pause before saying Dallas is in that tier of having proved they can at least get there. But all of this is to say there is so much in front of the Oilers right now. There is a lot of highway. There is a long way to go. They got off to as bad a start as they possibly could last year, and they still managed to drag themselves off the mat, go on crazy heaters. You win 8, you win 15 in a row. All of that added up. You showed that you can thrash bad teams. You took care of the Kings very easily. You can outlast a good team like you did Vancouver. You can outlast a good team like you did Dallas. And frankly, you showed you could hang with the big boys by getting to a 7th game against Florida after being down 3-0. You know, even if you didn't win the Stanley Cup, you showed an incredible amount of fortitude that not a lot of teams have. Not a lot of teams are physically capable of getting a 3-0 series, even a 3-2, let alone 3-3. So the Oilers have the capacity to do something special. It's simply just a matter of going out and doing it now. You know, we were talking about at the start of one of the segments, the idea of everything's out there in front of you. It is what you make of it. And I really do earnestly believe that, especially in sports when we're talking about good teams. The Oilers can do this. It is simply a matter of making the most of their opportunity. You might never have an easier path in the playoffs than you will in a year where the East has maybe 2 good teams in Florida and New Jersey. Like, as good as Carolina's playing right now, I don't particularly trust their goaltending situation. I don't trust their high-end players against other teams' best players. You know, that Carolina team has been great in the regular season since Rod Brind'Amour took over, but they don't have a signature series win. They've come up short a number of times against whether it be the Rangers, the Bruins, the Lightning. That does eventually become a knock against you, or last year Florida. And I don't know. I feel most comfortable in the East with Florida. Then I would probably say the Devils. In the West, it's Edmonton and Vegas. Those are the 2 teams I feel the best about. And when you think about it in the context of what they're priced at as far as futures to win the Stanley Cup, I think they have a reasonably decent price. I think Vegas should probably be priced a little bit better. If anything, I might go throw a couple bucks on Vegas as a future, just because I feel that they're capable of this, and the number they're at's a little bit silly. But that'll do it for today's edition of Locked On Oilers. If you could be so kind, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening, watching over on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Please leave the show a 5-star review if you're listening on Apple or Spotify. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow. We'll start ramping back up to get back to playing hockey, because I like doing these philosophical episodes, but this is a hockey podcast. Hockey podcasts are better when we have hockey to talk about. I'll see you guys tomorrow.